I stood behind the one-way glass, watching my estranged family enter my beach house. They looked so excited, admiring the ocean view and expensive furnishings, completely unaware that I owned it all. For 10 years, they'd excluded me from every family gathering, acting as if I never existed. The annual reunion was their sacred tradition, and I was the only one never invited. After a decade of being treated like I never existed, I watched them walk into my beach house, completely unaware that I was the one holding all the cards. This time, I was the one watching. Growing up in our middle-class home in coastal Massachusetts, I was once the pride of my family. Everyone said Beatrice Taylor had it all. Academic achievements that made teachers call home with praise, artistic talent that filled our living room walls, and the kind of drive that promised a bright future. My father, Thomas, a financial advisor with a reputation for perfectionism, would beam when introducing me at community events. My mother, Stephanie, always impeccably dressed and emotionally reserved, would collect my awards in a special display cabinet. My older brother, Brian, competed with me for our parents' attention, while my younger sister, Abigail, mostly stayed in the shadows, quiet and observant. On the surface, we were the picture-perfect American family. But beneath the polished veneer, there were cracks no one outside our home could see. Dad's perfectionism wasn't just professional. It was a relentless standard applied to his children. Mother's emotional distance wasn't sophisticated restraint. It was an inability to connect. And my siblings' attitudes weren't normal rivalry. They were the product of a household where love felt conditional on achievement. Still, there were moments of genuine happiness. The annual family reunions at my grandmother's beach cottage stand out vividly in my memory. Every summer, relatives from across 3 states would gather for a week of cookouts, beach games, and late-night conversations on the wraparound porch. Grandmother Martha was the family matriarch, the only person who seemed to love us all equally and without conditions. Her modest cottage, just a 5-minute walk from the Atlantic, was my childhood paradise. "You have your grandmother's spirit, Bee," she told me during our last summer together. I was 20 years old, home from my junior year of college. Never let anyone dim your light. 3 months later, she passed away peacefully in her sleep. The family gathered for the funeral, and afterward, we were surprised to learn she had left each grandchild a small inheritance. My portion was $10,000. Not life-changing money, but significant for a college student. "Don't blow it all on clothes and parties," my father warned, assuming I'd be irresponsible with the gift. My mother suggested I put it toward graduate school applications. Brian joked that I'd probably spend it on my artsy friends in some creative but impractical venture. Nobody in my family believed I had any financial sense. They never asked what I actually planned to do with the inheritance. What none of them knew was that I'd already been building a small side business designing vacation rental websites for property owners along the coast. I'd recognized early that the vacation rental market was changing. Individual owners needed help standing out online against big hotel chains. Grandmother's inheritance didn't fund frivolous purchases. It became the seed money that allowed me to expand from a one-woman operation into a legitimate business with actual employees. By the time I turned 32, that $10,000 investment had grown into a multi-million-dollar hospitality business. I owned 6 luxury properties along the eastern seaboard, managed dozens more for clients, and employed a staff of 28. The irony was delicious. The family that doubted my financial acumen had no idea I'd built an empire in the very industry they associated with our happiest memories. They also had no idea that I kept tabs on them through distant relatives and social media. That's how I discovered they were planning their first reunion in years. At a luxury beach house in my town, no less. And in keeping with the past decade, I was deliberately excluded from the invitation list. The fracture in our family happened exactly 10 years ago, during what should have been one of the proudest days of my life. I'd graduated summa cum laude with a double major in business and design. My parents and siblings attended the ceremony, taking photos and accepting congratulations from my professors. For that one afternoon, I felt like we were truly connected. I'd invited my boyfriend Jackson to join us for the graduation dinner at an upscale restaurant near campus. We'd been dating for almost 2 years, and he'd recently proposed. The vintage sapphire ring he'd saved for months to buy sparkled on my finger, though I'd kept it hidden from my family until I could tell them in person. Looking back, I should have known better than to expect their approval. Jackson came from a working-class background in rural Maine. His father was a lobsterman, his mother a school cafeteria worker. He was studying marine engineering on a combination of scholarships and student loans, working weekends at the campus maintenance department to make ends meet. He was kind, hard-working, and looked at me like I was the most amazing person he'd ever met. My father noticed the ring before I could announce our engagement. "What the hell is that on your finger?" he demanded, cutting me off mid-sentence as I was telling them about my job prospects. The restaurant fell quiet around us. Jackson reached for my hand under the table, a silent show of support. "Jackson and I are engaged," I said, trying to sound confident despite my racing heart. "We're planning to get married after he graduates next year." What followed was the most humiliating 30 minutes of my life. My father, the man who prided himself on his professional composure, completely lost control. He called Jackson a gold digger, said he was clearly after the family money that didn't even exist in the quantities my father implied. He brought up private family information to embarrass me, including a childhood incident where I'd been caught shoplifting a candy bar at age 9. He questioned my judgment, my intelligence, even my sanity for considering marriage to someone so obviously beneath our family's standing. Jackson sat there, absorbing every insult, with a dignity that only highlighted my father's lack of the same. Finally, when my father paused for breath, Jackson stood up, placed his napkin beside his barely touched meal, and said simply, "I think I should go. Congratulations on your graduation, Beatriz. I'll call you later." After he left, I turned to my family, expecting at least my siblings to show some support. Instead, Brian nodded in agreement with Dad, and Abigail stared at her plate. My mother sipped her wine and said, "Your father is just looking out for your future, dear. If you walk out that door after him," my father said, "don't bother coming back. It's time you decide where your loyalties lie, with the family that raised you, or with that nobody who's clearly using you." I stood up, shaking with anger and hurt. "That nobody," I said, "is the only person at this table who loves me for who I am, not for what I achieve or how I make you look to your friends." I left the restaurant and never returned to my childhood home. 3 weeks later, I received a letter signed by my entire immediate family. They informed me that I was no longer welcome at any family gathering, holiday, or event. They requested I not contact them until I had come to my senses and apologized for my disgraceful behavior and poor choices. The letter was coldly formal, typed rather than handwritten, as if addressing a problematic business associate rather than a daughter and sister. I called Abigail, hoping my little sister might be more understanding, but she refused to speak to me. Brian told me I'd broken our parents' hearts and needed to grow up and stop being so selfish. When I tried to visit home, no one answered the door, though all their cars were in the driveway. For 2 years, I sent birthday cards, holiday greetings, and occasional updates about my life. I never received any response. Jackson and I eventually broke up, not because of my family's disapproval, but because we realized we wanted different things from life. He moved to Seattle for a job opportunity, and we parted as friends. I never told my family about the breakup. They never asked. The first and only time any family member reached out was 5 years after our estrangement. My hospitality business had been featured in a regional business magazine, and somehow my mother had seen it. She called me out of the blue, not to congratulate me or to reconcile, but to ask if I could loan her $30,000 for a kitchen renovation. No apology, no questions about my life, just a request for money. I politely declined and suggested that perhaps we should first address the years of silence and the cruel letter before discussing financial favors. She hung up on me and blocked my number. That was the moment I truly understood that I had no family, at least not in the traditional sense. What I had were biological relations who had conditionally loved a version of me that existed only in their minds. When the real me emerged, independent, making my own choices, that conditional love evaporated. The realization was liberating in its finality. I stopped sending cards. I built my own traditions. I created a chosen family of loyal friends, dedicated employees, and eventually, a godchild whom I adore. I built a life that was authentically mine, unencumbered by the weight of others' expectations. And I thrived, not despite being cut off from my family, but perhaps because of it. I was checking my business email one Tuesday morning when a notification from Instagram caught my attention. A distant cousin had tagged my brother Brian in a post. "Can't wait for the Taylor family reunion next month. That beach house looks amazing." Curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked through to Brian's profile. His account was public. Brian always did crave attention and validation from as many people as possible. His most recent post showed a screenshot of a luxury rental listing with the caption, "Booked. Taylor Family Reunion 2025 is happening in style. 3 generations. 1 incredible beach house. 0 distractions. Can't wait." I froze when I saw the property in the image. It was the Seascape, one of my most profitable vacation rentals. A 6-bedroom modern marvel with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlantic. I'd purchased it 2 years ago, completely renovated the interior, and listed it through my management company under an LLC to maintain my privacy. By some cosmic coincidence, or perhaps because my hometown was becoming an increasingly popular vacation spot, my estranged family had booked my property for their reunion. They had no idea they were putting thousands of dollars directly into the pocket of the daughter they'd disowned. My first instinct was to cancel the reservation. I could have my property manager make up some emergency. Water damage, electrical issues, anything to prevent this uncomfortable situation. But as I sat there, staring at the post and the excited comments from relatives I hadn't spoken to in a decade, a different idea began to take shape. What if I let them come? What if I watched how they interacted? What they said about me when they thought I couldn't hear them? What if, after all these years of being excluded, I became the invisible observer of their precious reunion? The more I thought about it, the more the idea appealed to me. Not out of a desire for revenge exactly, but from a need for closure. For 10 years, I'd built narratives in my head about what they might say about me, how they might remember our estrangement. Here was an opportunity to know the truth. I called Grace, my most trusted property manager, and explained the situation. "Are you sure about this, Bea?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "It sounds emotionally complicated." "I'm sure," I replied, though part of me wasn't. "But I need your help to pull it off." Over the next 3 weeks, I prepared the seascape for my family's arrival with meticulous attention to detail. I replaced some of the generic artwork with pieces that might trigger memories. A watercolor of grandmother's cottage, a photograph of the harbor where we used to watch fireworks every 4th of July. I stocked the kitchen with the brands my mother always bought, arranged my grandmother's antique teacups in the glass front cabinet, and placed her beloved recipe book on the cookbook stand. All properties in my portfolio had security cameras in common areas, clearly disclosed to guests in rental agreements for safety purposes. I made sure the system at the Seascape was working perfectly, testing the feeds on my phone and laptop. I gave Grace specific instructions. She would personally check my family in, representing herself as the property manager, which she was. She would not mention my name or ownership. She would act normally but observe their reactions to the house and report back anything significant. The night before their scheduled arrival, I sat alone on the deck of the Seascape, listening to the waves crash against the shore below. The house would be empty for just one more night. Tomorrow, it would be filled with the voices of people who had once been my entire world. I felt a complex storm of emotions. Nervousness about whether my plan would work, curiosity about how they had changed, lingering anger at their rejection, and beneath it all, a small, stubborn hope that perhaps seeing the success I'd built might make them regret their decision to cut me out of their lives. "You're not doing this for revenge," I reminded myself, speaking aloud to the ocean. "You're doing this for truth, for closure." But as I locked up the house and drove back to my own home a few miles away, I wondered if those were just pretty lies I was telling myself. Perhaps part of me did want them to feel the sting of realizing that the daughter they'd dismissed as irresponsible now owned the luxury property they'd saved for months to rent. Perhaps I wanted them to know that despite their absence, or because of it, I had flourished. Whatever my true motivations, it was too late to back out now. The reservation was confirmed. The stage was set. In less than 24 hours, my family would walk into my house, and I would be watching their every move. Friday afternoon arrived with perfect beach weather. 78 degrees, gentle breeze, and enough clouds to create a stunning sunset later. From my home office, I logged into the Seascape security system, just as Grace texted me. First car arriving now. My heart pounded as I watched a silver SUV pull into the driveway. Brian stepped out first. My brother had aged in the past decade. His hairline had receded, and he'd gained at least 30 pounds. Still, I recognized his confident stride and the way he surveyed the property with an appraising eye, as if mentally calculating its value. A woman I didn't recognize emerged from the passenger side. Jennifer, his wife of 7 years, according to social media. She was pretty in a conventional way, with highlighted blonde hair and an expensive-looking tennis outfit. 2 children tumbled out of the back seat. A boy around 6 and a girl. Perhaps 4 or 5. My niece and nephew, whom I'd never met. "Wow, Dad, this place is huge!" the boy exclaimed, his voice clear through the outdoor microphones. "Only the best for the Taylors," Brian replied, ruffling his son's hair. "Wait till Grandpa sees this view." 20 minutes later, a black luxury sedan arrived carrying my parents. My father got out first, coming around to open the door for my mother with practiced gallantry. His hair had gone completely gray, but he still stood ramrod straight, dressed in pressed khakis and a polo shirt that screamed old money he didn't actually have. My mother had changed more dramatically. Her once natural brown hair was now platinum blonde, cut in an expensive bob that framed a face with noticeably fewer wrinkles than a woman in her 60s should have. She wore white linen pants and a silk blouse, oversized sunglasses completing the look of someone trying very hard to appear wealthy and carefree. "Brian," she called, air kissing her son's cheeks. "You've outdone yourself with this place." "Worth every penny, Mom," Brian replied. "Wait till you see inside." The final car to arrive was a compact hybrid containing my sister Abigail and her husband Doug, whom she'd married 3 years ago. Abigail had blossomed from the quiet, awkward teenager I remembered into a confident-looking woman with a sleek brown ponytail and simple, elegant clothing. Doug seemed pleasant enough, carrying their bags and complimenting the house's architecture with genuine enthusiasm. Grace met them at the front door, professional and welcoming as always. "Welcome to the Seascape," she said, offering my father the check-in tablet to sign. "I'm Grace, the property manager. I'll be showing you around and answering any questions you might have." My family followed her inside, exclaiming over the open-concept living area with its panoramic ocean views. I watched them explore the house, noting with satisfaction their impressed reactions to the chef's kitchen, the heated infinity pool, and the primary suite with its private balcony. "The owner has exquisite taste," my mother commented, running her hand along the quartz countertop. "The owner is actually a local entrepreneur who renovated this property 2 years ago," Grace explained, following our script perfectly. They're very hands-on with all the details. As they settled in, choosing bedrooms and unpacking, I continued to observe. The conversation flowed naturally to catching up on family news, local gossip, and plans for the week ahead. Then, during dinner preparation, I heard my name for the first time. "Remember when Beatrice set fire to the kitchen trying to make flambéed desserts?" Brian laughed, opening a bottle of wine. An uncomfortable silence followed. "We don't need to bring her up," my father said firmly. "This week is about family." "She is family, Dad," Abigail said quietly, surprising me. "Even if she's not here." "She made her choice 10 years ago," my mother replied, her voice tight. "She chose that boy over us. and then had the audacity to expect us to welcome him with open arms. She was young, Doug offered, clearly trying to be diplomatic. People make mistakes in their 20s. My father's expression hardened. It wasn't just about the boyfriend. It was her attitude, the disrespect, the ingratitude. After everything we'd done for her. Besides, my mother added, she's clearly unstable. Remember when she tried to contact us for years and then suddenly stopped? And then that bizarre call asking for money? No, we're better off without that drama. I nearly choked on my coffee. The narrative they'd constructed was so warped, so completely backward from reality, that for a moment, I thought they must be joking, but their faces were serious, their tones sincere. In their revised history, I was the unstable one, who had demanded money from them, not the other way around. The conversation shifted when my nephew accidentally knocked over a kitchen stool, but the damage was done. I now understood what narrative my family had created about my absence. I wasn't the wronged party who had been cruelly excluded. I was the troubled, ungrateful daughter who had abandoned them, then tried to exploit them financially. Later that evening, as they were settling in with drinks on the deck, Abigail discovered the first item I'd planted, grandmother's recipe book on the kitchen shelf. "Hey, look at this," she called to the others. "This old cookbook looks just like Grandma Martha's." My mother crossed the room quickly, taking the book from Abigail's hands. "That's strange," she murmured, flipping through the pages. "It even has the same stain on the snickerdoodle recipe. Probably just a coincidence," my father dismissed. These old community cookbooks were mass-produced. "But look," Abigail insisted, pointing to a handwritten note in the margin. "That looks like Grandma's handwriting. The owner probably collects vintage cookbooks," my mother said, closing the book decisively and returning it to the shelf. "Let's get those drinks poured." The subject was dropped, but I noticed Abigail returning to examine the cookbook later when the others were occupied with a card game. She took a photo of it with her phone, her expression thoughtful. As night fell, and my family retired to their bedrooms, I continued watching through the security feeds, feeling increasingly unsettled. The ease with which they had dismissed my existence, the complete revision of our shared history, cut deeper than I'd expected. They hadn't just excluded me from their lives, they'd created an alternate reality where their actions were justified, even righteous. And yet, Abigail's quiet defense and her curiosity about the cookbook suggested cracks in the unified front. Perhaps not everyone had fully bought into the family mythology. I switched off the feeds around midnight, emotionally exhausted but determined to continue with my plan. Tomorrow, I would escalate the coincidences and see how they reacted. The truth was slowly coming to light, even if they weren't ready to acknowledge it. Saturday morning brought a flurry of activity at the seascape. My family planned a beach day, followed by a barbecue on the deck. I watched them prepare, noting how they fell into familiar patterns. My father taking charge of the grill preparation, my mother organizing the food with military precision, Brian boasting about his expert knowledge of local beaches. As planned, Grace arrived mid-morning with a complimentary welcome basket from the property owner. "The owner likes to provide some local specialties for guests staying a week or longer," she explained, setting the large wicker basket on the kitchen island. My family gathered around as my mother unpacked the items. A bottle of small-batch whiskey from a distillery my father had once visited on a business trip. Grandmother's special tea blend from a local shop that still made it to her recipe. Artisanal chocolate from the candy store where we used to get our Easter baskets filled. And several other items specifically chosen to evoke family memories. "This is oddly personal," my mother said, examining the tea tin. "How would the owner know these specific brands?" Grace maintained her professional demeanor. "The owner tries to personalize welcome baskets based on guest information. Perhaps they noticed something in your booking details or social media that indicated preferences?" My father opened the whiskey bottle, sniffing appreciatively. "Well, they have excellent taste. This is hard to find these days." "It's almost like they know us," Abigail murmured. But the others were already moving on, packing beach bags and discussing lunch plans. Before leaving for the beach, my mother noticed one of the strategically placed photos I'd hung in the hallway. A black and white image of the harbor from the exact spot where we used to watch fireworks. Thomas, doesn't this look exactly like the view from Harris Point? She asked my father. He glanced at it briefly. Lots of New England harbors look the same, Stephanie. Don't get spooked by coincidences. They left for the beach, and I used the opportunity to make my next move. Through the property management system, I remotely accessed the digital photo frame in the living room, switching its rotating images to include several that featured our family, subtly placed among generic beach scenes and sunsets. When they returned hours later, sun-kissed and tired, Brian was the first to notice. Hey, that's weird, he said, stopping in front of the digital frame. That lighthouse looks like the one from our old summer photos. The family gathered around, watching as the frame cycled through images. When a distant shot of our family at a long-ago reunion appeared, small enough to be noticed, but not so obvious as to cause immediate alarm, Abigail gasped. That looks like us. From that reunion when I was maybe 12? My mother leaned closer. Don't be ridiculous. It's just a random family on a beach. But doubt had been planted. Throughout the evening, I noticed them all glancing at the photo frame, waiting for that image to reappear. My father eventually unplugged it, claiming the changing pictures gave him a headache. After dinner, as they sat around the fire pit on the deck, the conversation turned to financial matters. I hadn't expected this topic, but listened with growing interest. The business finally recovered last year, my father was saying, accepting another glass of his special whiskey from Brian. Those 5 years after the recession nearly ruined us. You never told us it was that bad, Abigail said, sounding surprised. My father shrugged. No need to worry the family. But yes, we came close to losing the house. If it weren't for that client who came through at the last minute, we might have had to declare bankruptcy. Is that why you sold grandmother's cottage? Brian asked. I always thought you just didn't want the maintenance headache. We had no choice, my mother said quietly. The property taxes alone were drowning us. I sat back in my chair, stunned by this revelation. All those years ago, when my mother had called asking for money, it wasn't for a frivolous kitchen renovation. They had been in genuine financial distress. Not that it excused their behavior, but it added a layer of complexity to the situation I hadn't considered. Do you ever wonder what Beatrice would say if she knew? Abigail asked suddenly, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. She'd probably gloat, my father replied bitterly. She always did think she knew better than everyone else. That's not fair, Dad, Abigail said, showing a backbone I didn't know she possessed. We never even gave her a chance to respond differently. We just cut her out completely. After she cut us out first? My mother interjected. Brian, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. Did she, though? I remember it differently. She kept sending cards and trying to call for years. We're the ones who slammed the door. She made her choice, my father insisted. But I could hear the defensiveness in his voice. Over a boy she didn't even end up with, Brian continued. I looked him up a few years ago. He's in Seattle now, married with kids. So we lost our sister over. What? Exactly? It wasn't about the boy, my mother said, echoing my father's earlier words. It was about respect. Was it? Abigail challenged. Or was it about control? About Beatrice finally making a decision Dad didn't approve of. My father stood abruptly. I'm not discussing this. That chapter of our family history is closed. He stormed inside, my mother following after shooting reproachful looks at both my siblings. Left alone by the fire, Brian and Abigail continued talking in lower voices. I tried to find her on social media a few years back, Abigail admitted. Her profiles are private, but her business page shows she's doing really well. I know, Brian replied. I drove by her office once when I was in town for a conference. Didn't have the guts to go in. Do you think she hates us? Abigail asked, sounding younger than her 30 years. Brian sighed heavily. I would, if I were her. Their conversation drifted to other topics, but I remained frozen in place, processing what I'd heard. The family unity I'd imagined wasn't as solid as I'd thought. Seeds of doubt had been planted long before my little experiment began. Brian and Abigail, at least, had been questioning the family narrative. I went to bed that night with mixed emotions. Part of me felt vindicated hearing my siblings acknowledge the truth of what had happened. Another part felt a surprising pang of empathy learning about my parents' financial struggles. And yet another part, the wounded daughter who had been cast out, still ached for the simple acknowledgement and apology I'd never received. Tomorrow would be day 3 of their stay. Based on what I'd observed, it was time to push harder. The cracks in their unified front were widening. Perhaps it was time to see if they would break open entirely. Sunday morning arrived with a dramatic coastal fog that shrouded the seascape in a dreamlike mist. I watched my family move through their morning routines. My father reading news on his tablet. My mother preparing a light breakfast. The children playing a board game on the living room floor. The atmosphere seemed tense after last night's fireside confrontation, with conversations kept superficial and polite. Grace had texted me earlier. Coming at 10 with housekeeping check. Still want to proceed with plan? Yes, I replied, my fingers hesitating only briefly before hitting send. It's time. At precisely 10 o'clock, Grace arrived, cheerful and professional as always. Good morning. Just doing a quick check to make sure everything's working properly and you have everything you need. My father intercepted her in the foyer, his posture stiff. Actually, we need to talk. There have been some unusual coincidences in this house that are making my family uncomfortable. Grace's expression showed polite concern. I'm sorry to hear that. What seems to be the problem? The photos in the digital frame, my father began, counting off on his fingers. The welcome basket with very specific items that have personal significance to our family. The cookbook that looks exactly like one our family used to own. It feels like someone is playing mind games with us. I assure you, Mr. Taylor, the owner is simply very detail-oriented and tries to create personalized experiences for guests. There's certainly no intent to make anyone uncomfortable, Grace replied smoothly. How would the owner know what brands my husband prefers? My mother asked, joining the conversation. Or that we used to watch fireworks from that exact harbor viewpoint. Internet research, perhaps, Grace suggested. Many guests appreciate these personalized touches. It feels invasive, my father insisted, almost like we're being watched. If he only knew. I'm very sorry you feel that way, Grace said, maintaining her composure. Would you like me to remove any of the items that are causing discomfort? Before my father could respond, Abigail called from upstairs. Mom? Dad? You need to come see this. Something in her voice, urgency tinged with shock, made everyone freeze. My parents exchanged glances before heading upstairs, Brian following closely behind. Grace remained in the foyer, but the indoor cameras allowed me to follow the unfolding scene. Abigail stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, holding a framed photograph. It was the final piece I had planted, my college graduation photo, placed in the back of a dresser drawer where someone would eventually find it while unpacking. I found this in the drawer, she said, her voice shaking. It's Beatriz, at her graduation. My mother took the frame, her hands trembling visibly. This is impossible. My father's face flushed dark red. This is not a coincidence. This is deliberate. Someone is messing with us. Brian took the photo, studying it carefully. It's definitely B. This is beyond weird now. They all trooped downstairs, my father clutching the photograph like evidence at a trial. Grace maintained her professional mask as he thrust it toward her. Can you explain this? He demanded. Why is there a photograph of our estranged daughter in this house? Who owns this property? I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to disclose the owner's personal information, Grace replied. But I can certainly ask about the photograph and how it might have gotten here. This goes beyond hospitality, my mother said, her voice rising. This feels like harassment. Grace took a diplomatic step back. I understand this is upsetting. Let me make some calls and try to sort this out. In the meantime, perhaps you could all relax and try to enjoy your vacation? The fog should clear by noon, and it's supposed to be a beautiful afternoon. She excused herself, stepping onto the deck to make calls. In reality, she was texting me. They found the photo. Your father is furious. Your mother seems shaken. Siblings confused but not angry. How do you want to proceed? I took a deep breath and made my decision. I'm coming over. Be ready in 30 minutes. Inside, my family had dissolved into chaos. The discovery of my photograph had broken the dam of suppressed emotions and unspoken tensions. This is not normal, my father shouted, pacing the living room. First all these coincidences, and now this? Someone is targeting us specifically. But why would anyone care enough to do this? Brian asked reasonably. Who even knows we're here besides family? Maybe it's her, my mother said quietly. All heads turned toward her. Maybe Beatrice found out somehow and is trying to. I don't know. Send us a message? That's ridiculous, my father dismissed. How would she even know we're here? And why would she care after all this time? Because we hurt her, Abigail said, her voice strong and clear. We hurt her badly, Dad. We wrote that horrible letter and cut her out of our lives completely. Over what? Because she fell in love with someone you didn't approve of? It wasn't just about the boy, my father roared, repeating the family mantra. Then what was it about? Brian challenged, surprising me with his intensity. Because from where I'm standing, we destroyed our relationship with B. Because you couldn't stand that she made one choice you didn't control. My father seemed to deflate suddenly, sinking onto the sofa. You don't understand. That boy was going to ruin her life. She was throwing away all her potential. She seems to have done pretty well for herself without our help, Abigail said, pulling out her phone. She opened Instagram and showed them my business profile. Look, she owns a hospitality company now, has properties all over the coast. My mother took the phone, scrolling through the images with a stunned expression. She's successful, and we missed it all, Brian said quietly. Every achievement, every milestone. We weren't there. The room fell silent as the weight of their collective realization settled over them. Then Abigail went to her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. I need to show you all something, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Mom, remember when you asked me to clean out the old desk in the study 4 years ago? My mother nodded, looking confused. I found this hidden in the back of the drawer. It's from Beatrice, dated 6 months after everything happened. She unfolded the paper, a letter I had completely forgotten writing, and began to read aloud. Dear family, this is my 12th letter to you, and I don't know if any of them have been read. I still hope they have. I miss you. Despite everything that happened, despite the words we can't take back, you're still my family. I dream about you almost every night. Stupid, ordinary dreams where we're just having dinner or watching TV together like nothing ever happened. Jackson and I have broken up. Not because of your disapproval, but because we realized we wanted different futures. He's moving to Seattle next month. But here's the thing I need you to understand. Even though you were right that the relationship wouldn't last, you were wrong about why it mattered to me. I loved him because he saw me as a person with my own dreams and choices, not as an extension of the family name or a collection of achievements to be proud of. I'm building a business now. It's small, but growing. Grandmother would be proud, I think. I'm using what she taught me about taking chances and believing in myself. All I'm asking for is a conversation, one dinner, no expectations beyond that. Just a chance to see if there's anything left to salvage from the family we once were. My number is still the same. Love always, Beatrice. When Abigail finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the room, including mine as I watched from my remote location. I never saw this letter, my father said, his voice hoarse. Neither did I, Brian added. All eyes turned to my mother, who had gone very pale. Mom? Abigail pressed. Did you hide this from everyone? My mother's hands twisted in her lap. I was trying to protect us all, she whispered. She'd hurt us so badly. Defied your father so completely. I thought a clean break was kinder than slowly drifting apart. That wasn't your decision to make for all of us, Brian said, anger evident in his voice. You kept this from her own father, her siblings. You had no right. I was jealous, my mother admitted, the words seemingly pulled from deep within her. Jealous of her freedom, her courage to walk away. I spent my entire life doing what was expected of me, building this family, supporting your father's career, and then Beatrice just left, made her own path. I couldn't bear to watch her succeed at something I never had the courage to try. My father stared at his wife of 40 years, as if seeing her for the first time. You kept me from my daughter because you were jealous of her? We both pushed her away, my mother countered, finding some strength. You gave her that ultimatum. You made her choose, and you made sure she couldn't come back, he replied, his voice breaking, even when she reached out. As they continued their painful reckoning, I texted Grace. I'm outside. It's time. I had driven to the seascape while watching their confrontation unfold. Now I sat in my car in the driveway, heart pounding, wondering if I was making the right choice. After a decade of silence, was I ready to face them? Were they ready to face me? Only one way to find out. I approached the front door and rang the bell. The doorbell echoed through the house, momentarily silencing the emotional confrontation inside. Through the security feed on my phone, I watched Grace move to answer it. Miss Taylor, she said loudly enough for my family to hear. Genuine surprise in her voice, even though we had planned this moment. What brings you here today? I stepped inside, my heart hammering against my ribs. Just checking in on our guests, I replied, matching her professional tone. I wanted to make sure everything was satisfactory with the property. My family stood frozen in the living room, a tableau of shock and disbelief. The letter Abigail had just read aloud still lay open on the coffee table. My mother had one hand pressed to her mouth. My father looked as though he'd seen a ghost. Brian and Abigail stared wide-eyed, while their spouses and children watched in confusion, not fully understanding the significance of my arrival. Grace turned to my family, maintaining her role perfectly. Mr. and Mrs. Taylor, this is Miss Beatrice Taylor, the owner of the Seascape. She likes to personally check in with guests who are staying for extended periods. Beatrice? My father whispered, the color draining from his face. Hello, Dad, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. It's been a while. You own this house? My mother asked, her voice faint with disbelief. I nodded, stepping further into the room. This one and several others up and down the coast. My company manages about 40 properties altogether. Brian was the first to recover. You knew we were coming here. You let us book your house. I found out by accident, I explained. I saw your post about the family reunion. By then, the reservation was already confirmed through my management company. So, all the coincidences, Abigail began, were deliberate, I confirmed. The cookbook, the photos, the welcome basket. I wanted to see how you'd react. If you'd recognize the connections. Why? My father demanded, finding his voice at last. Why not just cancel our reservation? Or reveal yourself immediately? Why the mind games? I took a deep breath, determined to speak my truth calmly. Because for 10 years, I've been excluded from every family gathering. I've been treated as if I never existed. I wanted to know who you really were now, what you really thought of me when you believed I couldn't hear you. So you spied on us? My mother accused. I observed guests in my property through disclosed security systems, I corrected. And I heard some interesting things. I heard the story you've told yourselves about what happened between us, how I supposedly abandoned the family, how I called demanding money. I heard how you've rewritten history to make yourselves the victims. My father started to protest, but I held up my hand. I also heard things I never knew. About the financial troubles. About selling grandmother's cottage. About Brian and Abigail questioning the family narrative. I looked directly at Abigail. Thank you for keeping that letter. I'd forgotten I even wrote it. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I found it years ago. I should have tried harder to reach you. We all should have, Brian said, stepping forward. B, I'm so sorry. What we did was unforgivable. It wasn't we entirely, I replied, looking at my parents. It started with an ultimatum. It continued with a cruel letter. And it was maintained by hiding my attempts at reconciliation. My father seemed to age 10 years before my eyes, his shoulders slumping as the weight of his actions finally settled on him. I was wrong, he said, the words clearly unfamiliar on his tongue. My pride, my need to control everything. I destroyed our family. Not just you, my mother added quietly. She looked up at me, really seeing me perhaps for the first time in decades. I was jealous of you, Beatrice, of your courage to live your own life. I made sure you couldn't come back, because I couldn't bear to watch you succeed where I had compromised. The raw honesty of her admission stunned me into silence. For years I'd imagined this confrontation, rehearsed what I would say, but I'd never expected such forthright acknowledgement of their failings. I didn't plan this as revenge, I said finally. I thought I wanted closure. To finally understand why my family could cut me off so completely. But standing here now, I realize what I really wanted was much simpler. I just wanted you to see me, really see me, as the person I am, not the daughter you thought I should be. Abigail crossed the room, and after a moment's hesitation, wrapped her arms around me. I've missed you so much, Bea, she whispered against my shoulder. The physical contact broke something in me. Tears I'd held back for years finally spilled over as I returned my sister's embrace. Brian joined us next, his big brother hug so achingly familiar that it transported me back to childhood moments when he had actually protected and comforted me. Before competition and jealousy had complicated our relationship, my parents remained where they stood, uncertain and clearly struggling with their own emotions. What happens now? My father asked, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. That depends, I replied honestly. This isn't a fairy tale where one dramatic moment fixes a decade of hurt. Trust has to be rebuilt. Relationships have to be redefined. We'd like to try, my mother said. If you're willing. I looked around at the family I'd lost and found again in the space of 3 days. At my nibblings who were watching curiously, not understanding the significance of what was happening, but sensing its importance. At Grace, who had played her role perfectly and now stood discreetly by the door, ready to leave us to our private reconciliation. I'm willing to start, I said finally. Not from where we left off, but from where we are now. As adults who can respect each other's choices and independence. My father nodded, tears streaming unchecked down his face. That's more than we deserve. It's not about deserving, I replied. It's about choosing a different path forward. The next few hours passed in a blur of conversations, some painful, some healing, all necessary. We moved to the deck, where the ocean breeze seemed to clear the air literally and figuratively. My niece and nephew were introduced to their new aunt, accepting this development with the easy adaptability of children. Jennifer and Doug, initially awkward, gradually relaxed as they realized the family crisis was moving toward resolution rather than deeper fracture. We talked about the past decade, my business growth, their lives, the grandchildren I hadn't met until today. We didn't solve everything. Some wounds were too deep for instant healing. My mother's deliberate concealment of my attempts at reconciliation remained a particularly painful point that would require more time and conversation to address fully. But we made a start. We agreed to monthly family dinners. My father asked to see my company offices, genuine pride replacing his previous dismissal of my capabilities. Abigail shared photos of her children's earlier years that I had missed. Brian apologized again and again, until I finally told him to stop, that moving forward was more important than continually looking back. As sunset painted the sky in spectacular pinks and oranges, we found ourselves gathered around the fire pit, the conversation having evolved from painful recriminations to cautious plans for the future. Will you join us for the rest of the reunion week? my mother asked hesitantly. There's certainly room, and it would give us more time. I smiled but shook my head. I think that's too much too soon. Let's not rush this. I'll come for dinner tomorrow night, and we can take it from there. Understanding flickered across her face, the first real evidence that she was finally seeing me as an individual, with valid boundaries rather than an extension of herself. Of course, whatever you're comfortable with. Before I left, Abigail pulled me aside. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For giving us another chance. For not becoming as hard and unforgiving as we were. I hugged her tightly. That's the thing about pain. It can break you open in ways that make you either harder or more compassionate. I decided long ago I didn't want to become like Dad, using rejection as a weapon. 1 year later, we gathered again at the seascape for another family reunion. This time, my name was on the invitation. This time, I didn't watch from behind cameras, but sat among them, part of the family once more. Not in the same way as before, but in a new, healthier configuration where boundaries were respected and differences celebrated rather than punished. My relationship with my parents remained the most complex and tentative, but we were working on it. My father had started therapy, confronting the controlling tendencies that had damaged his relationships. My mother and I had several difficult but necessary conversations about her jealousy and sabotage, slowly building a more honest relationship than we'd ever had before. Brian and Abigail had become true friends as well as siblings, our adult connection stronger for having survived its near destruction. Their children now knew me as Aunt B, who owned cool beach houses and told the best stories. As I watched the sunset that evening, surrounded by the family I had lost and found again, I reflected on the lessons of the past 11 years. I had learned that family isn't a fixed entity, but a living relationship that requires nurturing, honesty, and sometimes painful growth. I had learned that forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, but about creating space for a different future. Most importantly, I had learned that sometimes the bravest thing isn't walking away from toxic relationships, though that courage is real and necessary. Sometimes the bravest thing is offering a path back to people who have hurt you, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve the peace that comes from transforming pain into possibility. Standing at the edge of the deck, looking out over the ocean that had witnessed both my isolation and my reunion, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me here, not just to success and security, but to the wisdom that comes from healing old wounds instead of letting them define you. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between forgiving someone who hurt you deeply or maintaining distance to protect yourself? What factors helped you decide which path to take? I believe we all face these crossroads in relationships, and our choices in these moments reveal not just who others are, but who we are becoming. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, share, and comment with your own experiences of family reconciliation or boundary setting. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I wish you wisdom and peace in navigating your own complex relationships.